My name's Katherine Heard, and I've been a visual artist since I graduated in 1985 from the Ontario College of Art and completed a master's degree in 2005 at the University of Toronto. I work essentially in three areas. I am a professional artist creating work for galleries for public exhibition. I also teach art at the University of Toronto as a sessional instructor, which means I'm hired for individual courses rather than being a full-time employee. And I've also just started a business as a props builder for film, which in fact is something I've been doing off and on for about 15 years, but I've formalized it now with a website and I registered it as a business. I would say overall those tasks probably take 10 to 15% of my time, but they're not consistent over, say, a daily or a weekly period. It's more like at some points they'll take up all of my time, like when I'm doing my taxes or doing my GST or designing my website. I'll set aside time to do it all in a block and then not have to do it for a while. I would say that all of those things are actually important. Obviously, the ones that are really critical and time-based are things like doing taxes, submitting GST forms, and so on. But the other ones, for example, keeping my website up to date, are things that I don't have deadlines on, yet they're important to keep up to date on a longer term basis. But part of what I do to help with those tasks, because to be honest, they're the tasks that I don't like the best, is that I do have an assistant who helps me with some of those things. So for example, I'm most of the way through doing a big update mailing to museums and galleries across Canada, and she's largely taken over that. So the things like setting up the database and formatting the letters and so on. So I've done all the writing, but she's actually done all the actual physical labor on that. As far as day-to-day accounting goes, I do that myself. I just basically have envelopes for each category and put all the receipts in the envelopes as I go along, and then every so often I sit down and add them all up and fill out my Excel worksheet. And it's not work I enjoy, but it's a task that's pretty manageable. And the financial side of being a visual artist is probably one of the most difficult aspects of the job, because income tends to be inconsistent. You don't have a regular paycheck, and being an artist in Canada isn't at all lucrative. So in fact, my teaching and my props business subsidize my practice as a visual artist, which is usually, except in very rare years, normally it loses money rather than makes money. Not many. Again, one of the problems with being an artist is that you don't have a lot of financial security, and it's really a trade-off. I worked for 4 years in 2 different universities where I was an assistant professor full-time and was making a consistent income and was able to, have like retirement savings and so on. But the problem was I didn't have enough time to make art. So in fact, I made a very conscious decision to return full-time to my practice, to work part-time teaching and at other jobs. So it isn't that I didn't have the option to have that lifestyle, and I always keep in the back of my mind that, if the right job comes along, I may I may consider teaching full-time again, but the situation right now is that my partner's job has health benefits, so I'm very fortunate in that I do have funding for things like glasses and dental and medication. But in terms of retirement, I have to say it's a worry. I don't, when I was teaching full-time, I was able to put some money into retirement funds. The University of Toronto has a fairly good program where even as a sessional, if I put in, I can't remember whether it's 3 or 5% of my wages, I can't remember which it is, they'll put in matching contributions. So I do that, but to be honest, teaching a single course at a university is only worth about $7,000, so it's not a significant amount of money. And I do have serious concerns about what will happen when I retire. My solution at this point is that I can't retire. So, well, as a Canadian visual artist, it's, that's your option. You hope you don't get sick and you plan to work as long as you can. Well, I'm actually a member of a copyright collective called CARC, which is Canadian Artist Representation Copyright Collective. And that means that when someone approaches me to use an image, for example, an image of mine was recently used on the cover of a book. A magazine is publishing an interview next month that's using my images. They acquire those images by going through my copyright collective, and there are set fees that they pay for particular usage, and the fees vary according to a number of things. The size of the image, like is it a quarter of a page or a full page, and the size of the publication. So is it, is it a small publication that's only publishing 3,000 copies of a magazine for distribution in Canada, or is it a magazine that's publishing, or a book that's publishing thousands and thousands of copies that are going to be distributed internationally. So those copyright fees bring in a small amount of income. And just to give you a sense, like for example, the book cover that I did, which was for a publication that it's like a full color cover on a book, but it is an academic publication, so it won't have a huge distribution probably. I think I got about $1,000 for that. And for the images that are being published in the magazine, which is, again, it's an academic publication, it's a small literary magazine. The images, I think, are roughly a quarter page, black and white. I think I got maybe $180 after the Copyright Collective takes a cut. But I think those things are really important because as an artist, people don't realize that you have very few sources of income and that the images you produce are in fact intellectual property, and it is important that you be compensated, that they aren't something that are given away for free. But that being said, there are situations where I do allow images to be used for free. For example, a friend of mine who's a university professor wanted to use an image of mine on the front of her booklet that she gives to her students that has information about the course and readings, and to use the image to promote her course. And for something like that, of course, that's a completely different story. She's not making money off of it, so I wouldn't charge for something like that. But copyright is extremely important. Another source of income for me as a visual artist is when I exhibit my work in a non-commercial space like a museum or a non-commercial gallery. I also receive fees for that, and the schedule of fees is set by an organization called CARFAC, the Canadian Artists Representation organization. And so again, maybe it's considered part of copyright, this idea that you are paid when your work is exhibited. And I think that there is sometimes pressure for artists to give their work away for free. I think especially as a young artist, you're often told, oh, the benefit of this is that it's promoting your work. You know, give us your work essentially for free. And I think that's extremely problematic, as well as galleries that charge you to exhibit your work. In some cases it can be beneficial if you're a young artist, but generally speaking, I recommend not paying to exhibit your work. You should also be receiving fees if your work is being used for a charity. That if you're donating your work to a charity, you should be either receiving a cut of the profit, 50% or 30%, if the work is being auctioned, or you should receive a charitable tax receipt. But I think too often people don't recognize art as being a business, and they see it as almost a hobby, and that you would be very grateful to donate your work for their charity that possibly has absolutely nothing to do with the visual arts. I mean, I've been asked to donate for children's charities, for homeless shelters, for for AIDS organizations, and those are all incredibly valuable institutions. And I do often donate, particularly for an organization like ACT, which is the Toronto organization that supports people living with AIDS, because that was something that really affected people of my generation in the arts. But they pay me a fee. Like if they sell the work, I get either a cut of what the profit is, or I get a tax receipt. And usually I opt for a tax receipt. But I really recommend to young artists, don't feel pressured to give your work away for free with somebody telling you that this is a benefit to you to hang your work in their restaurant, or to give your work to their charity, especially if the charity doesn't have anything to do with the arts. There are lots of ways to promote your work where you will receive income from it. There's a problem, another thing around auctions that I think you need to be very conscious about as an artist is that you can set a minimum that the work has to be sold at. So if I'm selling a work that is valued in my gallery at $5,000, I don't want that work to sell for $200 or $500 because it's undercutting my own market. So usually I stipulate that the starting bid has to be a good percentage of the selling price, whether it's 70, 75%, so that there's an incentive for people to bid on it, but also that people don't get the sense that the work doesn't have value, or why would they buy from my gallery if they can get it for 1/10 of the price at an auction? So you do have to be conscious of those problems. Frequently you see online competitions now that offer things like an international exhibition of your work, or you get to be included in this book of the 100 top painters, but they're asking you to pay an entry fee of $50 or $100, or even more than that in many cases. And again, I really strongly recommend that people not do that. It's basically a money-making scheme that it doesn't benefit you as an artist. The books are often vanity press books where even if your image is chosen for the book, you're required to purchase X number of copies at X price. If you're paying for something, you need to really do your research. I mean, there are very legitimate exhibitions where there will be a small entry fee, local galleries, for example, local museums, things like, I don't know, say the Art Gallery of Mississauga or the Etobicoke Art Center, places like that where they'll say, you know, exhibition of local artists, the entry fee is $10, but you can verify that that exhibition is really going to take place, and the entry fee should be very, very minimal. It should be $10 or $25. If it's any more than that, I would seriously question whether it's a money-making scheme or whether it's just to cover the gallery costs. It's important to realize in the questions around copyright that even if you sell the work, you as an artist retain the copyright.
Which is different from a photographer, apparently.
Yes, it is actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does. It's important to understand. Yeah, it's very important to understand that. Like, if I hire a photographer to photograph my work, I actually own the copyright on the photograph, which is why I pay the photographer, you know, X amount of money, and art
Right.
photography isn't inexpensive. But you as an artist always retain your copyright. Well, I guess that would almost fall into two different categories. I think one of the benefits of being an artist is that you do have this very unique situation where you can essentially speak your mind in a public venue with your, I suppose when I say venue, I mean I'm speaking of the art being exhibited publicly, that is able to speak truths that perhaps other people are not able to speak easily. And I think that is one of the benefits of being an artist. But since we're talking about specifically about financial things, I think there are ethical considerations around artists and finances that are really important. One of them is the premise that art does have value, and that you as an artist deserve to be paid, that what you're creating has a tangible value. So, for example, I've donated my work to galleries, to the Art Gallery of Hamilton and to the Kamloops Art Gallery, and I've donated major installation pieces. And those pieces were assessed through the Canadian Heritage Foundation, and were assessed at values of, I think the one was assessed around $36,000 and the other was in the same range, maybe a little bit higher. So although I don't receive money for those works, they were done as a donation. I receive a tax benefit for that. And it's important as an artist that if you are in a situation where you're donating work to an institution, if at all possible, especially if it's a major piece of work, to do it through something like the Heritage Foundation, so that you know that a value has been placed on the work. Because that helps to establish the idea that, first of all, just the overall value of your work. So it helps to, for example, when my dealer's pricing my work, if they know that that's how much the work sold for, or that's how much the work was valued at by this other committee, it helps to set other prices for smaller works. But more importantly, because it's very hard to make a living off your work as an artist in Canada, and because my art business tends to lose money most years, if I were ever audited by the government when I declare every year that my work is costing me money, that I'm losing money on this business, then if I were ever challenged, I could point to that and say, you know, my business is losing money, but the work has been assessed at this value and it has been donated to public institutions. Other concerns around ethics of money and art, one of them is the artist's resale right, which CARFAC is trying to bring into Canada currently. And this is a law that I think Australia was the first country to do this, where they realized the problem that in Australia specifically, the situation that arose was that Aboriginal artists who began selling their work early in their careers, when they were very young, were paid very, very little for the work. They were selling it literally for a pittance. The work wasn't highly collectible at that time, and there were a few collectors, but there wasn't a huge market for it, so they weren't paying very much. And then 50, 60 years down the road, those early collectors were able to turn around and sell the same works for literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, while the artists were living in poverty. And the Australian government addressed this by instituting something called the artist resale right, which essentially says that when the work is resold, the artist is entitled to a percentage of the sale. And currently, Canadian artists are trying to get a similar law passed in Canada. And it is very important, especially, I think, for young artists to realize that as an artist, you do need to be politically active, and you do need to be knowledgeable around laws, because we need to be able to create some pressure on the government to bring in laws that benefit artists. Another law that would significantly benefit artists, and that we're, again, CARFAC is trying to bring in through the Canadian government, is averaging artists' salaries across a period of years rather than on an annual basis. Because unlike a person who is employed in a traditional job where your salary is usually the same every year or fluctuates very little, it might fluctuate 5 or 10% maybe if you're getting commissions, artists' salaries or artists' income can fluctuate wildly from year to year. If you have a very good year, you sell a major work, maybe you're going to make 2 or 3 times as much as you would in a year when you don't do well, or in many cases you may lose money for a number of years and then have one really good year and then lose money again for several years. And if you're able to average that income, it saves you from the problem of being forced to pay a very high tax bracket on a year where you happen to do well. So again, as I said, I think it's really important for artists to be politically aware of the laws around finances that affect them, and also to be politically active in trying to help bring those benefits in, both for yourself, obviously, but also for other artists in your community.